And now a special address from the President of the United States on global warming.
For centuries, the rays of the sun have warmed the surface of our Earth's crust. And apparently those rays are intensifying in such a way that it's increasing lava flows. And
Cut.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
Buzzwords like global weirding, ecoflation, and green jobs get thrown around all the time in conversations about climate change. But does anyone actually know what they're talking about?
Obviously, these are serious and time-sensitive issues, but we can't take action without understanding what's going on. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay, not all the way at the beginning, but let's go back about 40 years.
In the 1970s, increasing industrialization, urban-to-rural migration, and the expanding use of pesticides and fertilizers brought environmental health into the national consciousness.
In 1972, national leaders gathered to address these issues at the UN Conference on Human Environment held in Stockholm.
The next conference, known as the Earth Summit, took place in the Rio de Janeiro 20 years later.
Out of this conference came Agenda 21 and two other conventions, the Framework Convention on Climate Change and Biological Diversity, both of which were legally binding.
We need action. Shame, shame, we're burning up.
The Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed by 154 countries and established COPs, conferences of the parties, where participating countries would meet on a regular basis to work on implementing the objective of the convention.
At the third COP, held in Japan in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was prepared by member countries.
I am very pleased that the United States has reached a truly historic agreement with other nations of the world to take unprecedented steps to address the global problem of climate change. The agreement is environmentally strong and economically sound.
Three main goals were decided on: emission reduction targets of greenhouse gases for each of the member countries, a greenhouse gas emission trading program, and future meetings to set penalties for those who violated the established targets and regulation rules of the program.
In 2001, George W. Bush was elected president, but unlike President Clinton, his predecessor, he did not support the protocol and refused to ratify it.
We didn't feel like the Kyoto Treaty was well balanced. It didn't include developing nations.
In order for the protocol to be put into action, developed countries representing a total of 55% of the greenhouse gas emissions in 1990 had to commit. It finally came into effect in 2005, 7 years after it was first negotiated, when Russia ratified the document.
Under Kyoto, industrialized nations pledged to reduce their yearly emissions of carbon averaging 5.2% by 2012. Three market-based mechanisms were introduced with the hopes of stimulating sustainable development through technology transfer and investment, helping countries with Kyoto commitments to meet their targets by reducing emissions or removing carbon from the atmosphere in other countries in a cost-effective way, and encouraging the private sector and developing countries to contribute to emission reduction efforts.
Although in 2011 it appeared that some countries would meet their goals, other nations were falling short. In addition, the United States and Canada emitted enough extra greenhouse gases to erase all the reductions made by other countries during the Kyoto period. From 1990 to 2009, worldwide emissions rose nearly 40%.
While the Kyoto Protocol ultimately failed, there is still hope for change.
In 2015, the next COP will be held in Paris, and UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon says world leaders are ready to sign an international agreement to combat climate change.
Now is the time to more properly match global wealth with global need. All resources, public and private, domestic and international, need to be tapped.
By the end of the meeting, for the first time in over 20 years of UN negotiations, all the nations of the world, including the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, will be bound by a universal agreement on climate change.
The UN's central goal is to keep global temperatures from rising 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The average global temperature is currently 0.8 degrees Celsius higher, and 2/3 of this increase happened since 1975. It is estimated by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that this requires a worldwide reduction of 40 to 70% of greenhouse gases by 2050, and to do so will cost the world economy 0.06% of growth annually until 2100.
One of the obstacles that prevented the Kyoto Protocol from succeeding was concerns about free riders, countries that would benefit from the agreement while bearing no costs.
Several solutions have been proposed, including one that draws on a vision for equity, created in Warsaw 2013 for its inspiration about how to divide up the costs. Climate Fair Shares is an estimator for how much each country is going to have to do to meet global climate change goals. This calculator focuses on how much would be needed to get back to 1990's emissions levels. In defining the fair shares of each country, Climate Fair Shares uses the methodology developed by the Stockholm Environment Institute in Ecoequity and builds out of their Climate Equity Reference Calculator.
Other key strategies that could be used to reduce carbon emissions are the linkage of cap-and-trade systems. This strategy would lay out rules for carbon use and would reduce the allowed amount over time. On the plus side, this proposal is appealing to the private sector and may encourage many countries to agree due to its flexibility.
However, it may be too weak to effect any change and gives too much decision power to large greenhouse gas emitters and large corporations.
Other options are to increase the use of alternative energies, including expanding nuclear power.
Or invest in new cheap technologies.
Scientists and other experts report that a failure to reduce emissions could threaten society with food shortages, refugee crises, the flooding of major cities and entire island nations, mass extinction of plants and animals, and a climate so drastically altered it might become dangerous for people to work or play outside during the hottest times of the year.
Although our national boundaries often prevent us from working together, this is one issue that we cannot combat alone.